After I punched my wife's brother for pouring hot spaghetti on my head at the family reunion, everyone ignored me, even my wife. You should take every insult and apologize, she said. Instead of apologizing, I bought a one-way ticket to Hawaii. 5 minutes later, I received 315 desperate messages and calls. So here's the thing about family reunions. They're like root canals, except at least with root canals, you get good drugs and nobody expects you to smile through the whole damn thing. But there I was, sitting in this barn-style dining hall that looked like someone had watched too many episodes of Fixer Upper and decided rustic chic was the way to go, surrounded by the Prescott clan in all their designer-clad glory. The smell hit you like a freight train the second you walked in. Marinara sauce bubbling away in those industrial-sized warmers, garlic bread that probably came from some fancy bakery in the city, and enough cologne and perfume to choke a horse. Seriously, Uncle Howard must have bathed in that stuff. I'm pretty sure I caught a contact high, just sitting downwind from the guy. I'd strategically positioned myself at the long pine table like some kind of social warfare expert, hands folded in front of me like I was back in third grade waiting for Mrs. Henderson to tell me whether my book report on Where the Red Fern Grows was going to cut it. You know that feeling when you're trying so hard to blend into the furniture that you practically become one with the wood grain? Yeah, that was me, human wallpaper at the Prescott Family Spectacular. But then there was Marissa, my wife of 6 years, and man, she was absolutely glowing. I'm talking full-on lighthouse beacon here, laughing at something her cousin Sophie had just whispered in her ear. Her whole face lit up in a way I hadn't seen since. Hell, I couldn't even remember the last time. Maybe our honeymoon. Before reality set in, and she realized she'd married the guy who shops at Target instead of Nordstrom and thinks a fancy dinner is anything that doesn't come in a drive-through bag. The rest of her family had claimed their spots around the table like they were marking territory. Uncle Howard sat there in his tailored blazer that probably cost more than my monthly car payment. And my car isn't exactly a beater, mind you. The guy looked like he'd stepped out of a whiskey ad, all Silver Fox confidence, and I own half the city energy. Then there was Aunt Margot, dripping in so much gold jewelry, she could have been mistaken for a walking Fort Knox exhibit. Every time she moved, it sounded like wind chimes in a hurricane. And then, of course, there was Tristan. Tristan. Marissa's beloved brother, who'd made it crystal clear from day one that I wasn't exactly his first choice for brother-in-law material. The guy had the kind of face that screamed, I peaked in prep school, and I'm gonna make that everyone else's problem. 6 years we'd been doing this dance. 6 years of him looking at me like I was something he'd scraped off his Italian leather shoes. The conversation flowed around me like I was a rock in a stream. All talk about ski trips to Aspen that cost more than most people's annual salaries. Wine tastings in Napa, where they probably spent more on a bottle than I made in a week, and exclusive charity galas that had guest lists tighter than Fort Knox. You know, the kind of events where they don't just check your name at the door, they check your net worth, your family tree, and probably your credit score while they're at it. I nursed my water like it was liquid courage, which, let's face it, it basically was at this point. The ice cubes clinked against the glass every time my hands shook just a little. Not from nerves, mind you, but from the sheer effort it took to keep my mouth shut while they talked about their problems, like whether the caviar at last week's fundraiser was subpar or if their personal trainers were charging too much for house calls. So the decorator says the marble we picked out might clash with the new chandelier, Aunt Margot was saying, waving her fork around like she was conducting an orchestra. Can you imagine? After we specifically told them we wanted something that would complement the existing color scheme. Sophie nodded sympathetically, like this was truly one of life's great tragedies. Oh, the same thing happened to us with the pool house renovation. You really can't trust anyone these days. I took another sip of water, wondering if anyone would notice if I just slowly slid under the table and army crawled my way to freedom. Probably not. I was about as invisible to these people as their housekeeping staff. That's when Tristan decided to make his move. He'd been eyeing me all evening like a cat watching a mouse, just waiting for the perfect moment to pounce. He leaned forward, that trademark smirk spreading across his face like spilled wine on white carpet. Ugly and impossible to ignore. Grayson, he drawled, and I swear the temperature in the room dropped about 10 degrees. You're being awfully quiet tonight. What's the matter, buddy? Did your little hometown never teach you how to keep up with adult conversation? The chuckles that rolled down that table hit me like a slap in the face. Not the kind of genuine laughter you hear when someone tells an actually funny joke, but that polite, superior kind of laughter that says, "We're laughing at you, not with you, and we want to make sure you know it." I felt my jaw clench, felt that familiar heat creeping up my neck that always showed up when I was about 2 seconds away from saying something that would probably end with me sleeping on the couch. But I forced myself to smile. One of those tight, fake smiles that feels like it might crack your face in half if you hold it too long. Just enjoying the conversation. I managed to get out, my voice steady, even though my hands were practically vibrating with the effort it took not to reach across the table and show Tristan exactly what this small-town boy had learned about conflict resolution. But that wasn't good enough for him. Oh no, Tristan was just getting warmed up. I mean, we're talking about real estate in the Hamptons, and you look like someone just started speaking ancient Greek. Maybe we should switch to discussing, I don't know, what do people talk about where you're from? Tractor pulls? County fair pie contests? More laughter, louder this time. Even Uncle Howard cracked a smile, like watching his nephew tear apart his niece's husband was quality family entertainment. I caught Marissa's eye across the table, looking for backup, for solidarity, for anything that resembled the us against the world mentality we used to have. Instead, I got that look, the one I'd become way too familiar with over the past few years. That subtle shake of the head, that slight narrowing of the eyes that said, "Don't you dare make a scene," louder than if she'd screamed it across the room. "Let it go," that look said. "Just take it and smile and pretend like it doesn't bother you, because heaven forbid we upset the delicate ecosystem of Prescott family dynamics." So I sat there, water glass sweating in my palm, marinara sauce growing cold on the serving platters, surrounded by the sound of their laughter and the smell of their expensive cologne, and I let it go. Just like I always did. Just like they expected me to. But something was different this time. Something was building in my chest, hot and tight and dangerous. Maybe it was the way Tristan's eyes gleamed with satisfaction. Or maybe it was the way Marissa looked away like she was embarrassed to be married to me. Or maybe it was just 6 years of this crap finally reaching its breaking point. Whatever it was, I had a feeling this family reunion was about to get a lot more interesting than anyone had bargained for. You know how they say time slows down right before a car crash? Well, apparently the same thing happens right before your brother-in-law decides to turn you into a walking Italian restaurant advertisement. 1 second I'm sitting there picking at my Caesar salad, which, by the way, had enough anchovies to stock a small aquarium. And the next second I'm watching Tristan rise from his chair like some kind of designer-clad villain in a really twisted dinner theater production. The conversation had moved on from my apparent lack of sophistication to discussing their latest investment properties. Uncle Howard was going on about some waterfront condo he'd just snagged in Miami, gesturing with his wine glass like he was conducting a symphony of his own awesomeness. "The view from the penthouse is absolutely divine," he was saying. "You can see clear to the horizon on a good day." "Oh, Howard, you simply must show us the photos again," Aunt Margot gushed, her gold bracelets jangling like a one-woman percussion section. "The marble in that kitchen is just exquisite." I was trying to calculate exactly how many months of my salary that condo probably cost when Tristan made his move. He stood up smooth as silk, reaching for the big ceramic serving dish that held enough spaghetti marinara to feed a small Italian village. For a split second, I thought he was just going for seconds. Hell, the guy ate like he had a hollow leg. Probably burned calories just from being such an ass. But then I saw it. That look in his eyes. The same look he'd had at Marissa's and my wedding when he'd accidentally bumped into me during the father-daughter dance, causing me to stumble and nearly take out the whole wedding party like bowling pins. Pure, calculated malice wrapped up in a Polo Ralph Lauren package. "Grayson," he said, his voice dripping with fake concern, "you look a little pale. Maybe you need some color in your life." That should have been my cue to duck, to roll, to do literally anything except sit there like a deer in headlights. But my brain was still processing the fact that a grown man, a 34-year-old investment banker who wore cufflinks to casual dinners, was actually considering what I thought he was considering. And then he did it. The ceramic dish tilted, and suddenly I was getting an up-close and personal introduction to every ingredient in Aunt Margot's famous marinara recipe. Hot sauce hit my scalp first, then came the noodles, long, slimy pasta sliding down my face like the world's worst facial treatment. The temperature was somewhere between fresh from the stove and third-degree burn, and I felt every drop as it soaked through my button-down shirt and pooled in my lap. For exactly 3 seconds, the entire dining hall went dead silent. Not the comfortable kind of quiet you get when everyone's focused on their food, but that horrible, suffocating silence that happens when 30 people simultaneously realize they just witnessed something that definitely wasn't in the evening's program. Then Tristan started laughing. It wasn't just a chuckle or even a regular laugh. This was the kind of deep, belly-shaking laughter that comes from pure, unadulterated joy at someone else's humiliation. The sound echoed off the barn-style walls, bouncing around the room like it was specifically designed to make sure everyone heard just how funny he found the sight of his sister's husband wearing dinner instead of eating it. I sat there for a moment, sauce dripping from my chin onto my ruined shirt, noodles hanging from my hair like the world's most pathetic Christmas ornaments. Around the table, I could see everyone's faces frozen in various expressions of shock, amusement, and what might charitably be called concern if you squinted really hard and had a vivid imagination. Aunt Margot had her hand pressed to her chest like she was having vapors, but her eyes were bright with the kind of excitement people get when they witness a really good train wreck. Sophie was covering her mouth, but I could see the grin underneath her fingers. Uncle Howard was shaking his head, but more in the boys will be boys way than the this is completely unacceptable way. And Marissa? Marissa just sat there looking like someone had told her the stock market had crashed and taken her trust fund with it. Not horrified that her husband had just been publicly humiliated, not angry that her brother had just crossed about 15 different lines of basic human decency, just disappointed. Like I'd somehow failed her by existing in the same space as flying pasta. That's when something inside me snapped. Maybe it was the way the sauce was starting to burn my scalp, or maybe it was the sound of Tristan's continuing laughter, or maybe it was just 6 years of swallowing every insult, every slight, every joke at my expense finally reaching critical mass. But I stood up, pasta falling from my shoulders like some kind of carb-heavy confetti, and I felt my right hand ball into a fist before my brain even caught up with the program. The punch connected with Tristan's jaw with a sound that was part slap, part crack, and entirely satisfying. Physics took over from there. His head snapped back, his designer loafers lost their grip on the polished floor, and he went down like a sack of overpriced potatoes, taking a chair with him in a crash that would have made a stuntman proud. The silence that followed was somehow even more complete than before. This wasn't shocked silence. This was, holy crap, the quiet guy just laid out the golden boy silence. The kind of quiet that makes you realize you can hear the air conditioning humming and someone's stomach growling 3 tables over. Aunt Margot was the first to break. "Tristan!" she shrieked, rushing to her precious nephew like he'd been shot instead of simply introduced to the concept of consequences. "Someone call a doctor. He could have a concussion." Uncle Howard was muttering something about keeping things civil and what will people think, because apparently the real tragedy here wasn't that his nephew had just assaulted someone with dinner, but that it might reflect poorly on the family name. Sophie was wide-eyed, phone already out, probably texting her friends about the drama unfolding in real time. OMG, you guys are not going to believe what just happened at the reunion. And through it all, Marissa remained seated, not jumping up to check if I was hurt, not telling her family that what Tristan did was completely out of line, not even asking if I was okay. She just sat there, staring at me like I'd committed some unforgivable sin by defending myself. Tristan was starting to come around, Aunt Margot fussing over him like he was made of spun glass instead of entitlement and bad decisions. His jaw was already starting to swell, and I couldn't help but think it was a good look on him. Really brought out the asshole in his eyes. "You're insane," he mumbled through what I hoped was going to be a spectacular bruise. I was just having a little fun. Fun, right? Because nothing says good times like assault with a deadly marinara. I wiped sauce from my eyes, feeling it stick to my fingers like some kind of Italian-flavored superglue, and looked around the room at all these people who were supposed to be family. Not a single person had moved to help me clean up. Not one napkin had been offered. Nobody had said, "Hey, maybe dumping hot food on someone isn't exactly appropriate dinner behavior." Instead, they were all looking at me like I was the problem. Like I was the one who'd violated some sacred family code by having the audacity to hit back, when someone literally poured dinner on my head. The marinara was starting to cool, which somehow made it feel even worse, going from scalding humiliation to cold, sticky shame in real time. I could feel it soaking through my shirt, probably staining my undershirt too, and I wondered absently if marinara sauce was one of those things that never really comes out no matter how much bleach you throw at it. Standing there in that barn-style hall, surrounded by fake rustic charm and real family dysfunction, covered in pasta sauce and noodles like some kind of demented scarecrow, I realized something that should have been obvious years ago. I wasn't family to these people. I was entertainment, a target, the designated punching bag they could all feel superior to when they needed a boost to their collective ego. And the worst part? Marissa was just going to let it happen. Again, walking out of that dining hall felt like escaping from a burning building. Except instead of smoke, I was leaving behind a cloud of designer perfume, passive-aggressive tension, and the lingering smell of marinara sauce that was probably going to haunt my nostrils for the next week. The wide porch wrapped around the front of the reunion hall like a wooden embrace, and for the first time all evening, I could actually breathe without feeling like I was drowning in other people's expectations. The night air hit my sauce-covered face like a cool slap of reality. Out here, away from the theatrical gasps and pearl-clutching performance art happening inside, I could finally hear myself think. Unfortunately, what I was thinking wasn't exactly suitable for polite company. I grabbed my shirt sleeve and started wiping marinara off my cheeks, which was about as effective as trying to clean up a crime scene with a tissue. But hey, at least I was doing something productive. My hair was still sticky with sauce, and every time I ran my fingers through it, I came away with more evidence of Tristan's idea of family fun. Chunks of tomato, bits of basil, and enough garlic to ward off every vampire in a 50-mile radius. I probably looked like I'd lost a fight with a pasta factory, which, come to think of it, wasn't that far from the truth. The porch light buzzed overhead like an angry wasp, casting everything in that yellowish glow that makes everyone look like they're coming down with jaundice. I leaned against the wooden railing, feeling the splinters through my ruined shirt, and tried to process what had just happened in there. In the span of about 10 minutes, I'd gone from invisible family disappointment to public enemy number one, all because I'd had the audacity to defend myself when someone literally dumped dinner on my head. That's when I heard the screen door creak behind me. I didn't need to turn around to know who it was. I could practically feel the waves of disapproval radiating from the doorway like heat from a furnace. Marissa's footsteps were crisp against the wooden planks, each one sounding like a little judgment hammer hitting the nail of my coffin. "Well," she said, and I could hear her crossing her arms without even looking. That was quite a performance in there. I turned around slowly, sauce still dripping from my collar, and looked at my wife of 6 years. The woman I'd promised to love, honor, and cherish until death do us part. The woman who was currently looking at me like I'd just kicked a basket of puppies in front of a group of kindergartners. "Performance?" I said, my voice coming out rougher than I'd intended. "Your brother just dumped hot pasta on my head, and you think I put on a performance?" She was doing that thing she did when she was trying to be reasonable, tilting her head slightly to the side, speaking in that measured tone that therapists probably learn in school. "You know how Tristan is," she said, like that explained everything. Like how Tristan was some kind of natural disaster we all just had to learn to live with, like hurricanes or tax season. "Yeah," I said, wiping more sauce off my neck. "I know exactly how Tristan is. He's an entitled jackass who thinks other people exist solely for his entertainment." Marissa's expression didn't change, which somehow made it worse. If she'd gotten angry, if she'd yelled, if she'd shown any kind of emotion at all, I might have been able to work with that. But this cold, clinical disappointment? This was like trying to argue with a customer service robot. "You should apologize," she said, and for a second I thought I'd misheard her. Maybe the marinara had gotten in my ears along with everything else. I should what now? Apologize? To Tristan? To the family? "You embarrassed all of us tonight." I stared at her, waiting for the punchline, for the moment when she'd crack a smile and tell me she was kidding. But her face remained as serious as a tax audit, and I realized she was completely, 100% sincere. "Let me get this straight," I said, feeling that dangerous heat building in my chest again. "Your brother pours scalding hot food on my head in front of 30 people, and I'm the one who needs to apologize?" "You know how important these family gatherings are," she continued, like I hadn't spoken at all. Uncle Howard was talking about potentially bringing you into one of his investment projects. But after tonight, she trailed off, shaking her head like I'd just blown our shot at winning the lottery. And maybe I had, from her perspective. Maybe losing out on Uncle Howard's largesse was worse than watching her husband get publicly humiliated by her psychopath brother. You should take every insult and apologize, she said, and there it was. The mission statement of our marriage, laid out in plain English under a buzzing porch light, while I stood there covered in marinara sauce like some kind of walking Italian food advertisement. I should take every insult, every slight, every joke at my expense, every casual cruelty that her family dished out like party favors. And then I should apologize for existing, for breathing their air, for daring to marry above my station, and for getting my place in their carefully constructed social hierarchy. He poured hot food on me. I repeated, because apparently I needed to say it louder for the people in the back. Hot food on my head. Marissa shrugged, actually shrugged, like someone had asked her opinion about the weather. You know how Tristan is. There it was again. The ultimate excuse, the get-out-of-jail-free card that apparently covered everything from casual cruelty to actual assault. Tristan could probably burn down an orphanage, and Marissa would just shrug and say, well, you know how Tristan is. The silence stretched between us like a chasm, filled with 6 years of accumulated resentment and the sound of insects buzzing around the porch light. Inside, I could hear the muffled sounds of the family regrouping, probably already spinning the story into something where I was the villain and poor Tristan was the victim of my unprovoked attack. I'm not apologizing, I said finally. Not to him, not to them, not to anybody. Marissa's mouth tightened into that thin line that meant I'd just failed another test I didn't know I was taking. Then you're making a choice, Grayson. You're choosing your pride over our marriage, over our future, over everything we've built together. Everything we'd built together. Right. Like our marriage was some kind of joint construction project instead of 6 years of me slowly disappearing into the background while she chose her family's approval over her husband's dignity at every single turn. What exactly have we built, Marissa? I asked, spreading my arms wide, sauce flying off my sleeves. A relationship where your family treats me like garbage and you expect me to smile and ask for seconds? She didn't answer, just turned on her heel like I was a disappointing employee who'd just been fired. Her footsteps clicked across the porch planks with military precision, each step taking her further away from me and closer to the warm glow of family acceptance waiting inside. If you don't come back in there and make this right, she said without turning around, don't bother coming home tonight. And then she was gone, the screen door slamming behind her with a finality that echoed across the empty porch. I stood there alone under the buzzing light, marinara sauce cooling on my skin, listening to the distant sound of laughter from inside the hall. They were probably already back to discussing wine tastings and ski trips, the unpleasant interruption of my existence already filed away and forgotten. I looked down at my ruined shirt, at the sauce stains that would never come out, at the physical evidence of what happened when you tried to stand up for yourself in the Prescott family ecosystem. Then I looked at the door Marissa had just walked through, leading back to a world where I was expected to apologize for being humiliated, where my worth was measured by how much abuse I could absorb without fighting back. Standing there on that porch, with the night air cooling the sauce on my scalp and the sound of my in-laws' laughter drifting through the windows, I realized something that should have been obvious years ago. If I walked back through that door, if I went back in there and apologized for defending myself, I'd be stepping right back into the same cage they'd kept me in for 6 years. The only question was whether I had the guts to stay outside. Driving away from that reunion hall felt like breaking out of prison, if prison was decorated in rustic barn chic and smelled like disappointed rich people. My hands were still shaking on the steering wheel, not from adrenaline anymore, but from something that felt suspiciously like freedom. Every mile I put between myself and the Prescott family circus was another breath of air that actually belonged to me. My phone had been buzzing like an angry hornet trapped in a jar ever since I'd gotten in the car, lighting up the dashboard with notification after notification. I could see Marissa's name flashing repeatedly, interspersed with numbers I recognized as various members of her family tree. Probably Uncle Howard trying to have a word with me, or Aunt Margot wanting to lecture me about proper family behavior, or hell, maybe even Tristan himself calling to gloat about his marinara masterpiece. But here's the thing about rock bottom. Once you hit it, you realize you've got nothing left to lose. And ignoring their calls felt better than any therapy session I'd ever imagined. 10 miles down the road, I spotted the familiar glow of a gas station rising out of the darkness like a fluorescent oasis. One of those 24-hour joints that looks like it was designed by someone who'd never seen daylight. All harsh white lighting and reflective surfaces that make everything look like a crime scene waiting to happen. I pulled into the parking lot, my tires crunching over gravel and discarded lottery tickets, and just sat there for a minute, engine ticking as it cooled. Through the windshield, I could see the usual late-night gas station ecosystem in full swing. A trucker filling up his rig while talking on a headset, probably explaining to his wife why he was running late again. A college kid counting out crumpled dollar bills for gas money, looking like he was calculating whether he'd have enough left over for ramen noodles. A woman in scrubs who was obviously pulling a double shift, moving with that particular kind of exhaustion that comes from keeping the world running while everyone else sleeps. Real people, living real lives, dealing with real problems. Not a single one of them was worried about whether their caviar was properly chilled or if their personal trainer was charging too much for house calls. I turned off the engine and really looked at myself in the rearview mirror for the first time since the pasta incident. I looked like I'd lost a fight with an Olive Garden kitchen, sauce stains on my shirt that were already setting into permanent reminders of tonight's festivities, my hair still sticky with marinara, and something in my eyes that I hadn't seen in years. It took me a minute to recognize what it was. It was possibility. Inside the gas station, the fluorescent lights hummed with the kind of white noise that makes you feel like you're in a spaceship. The clerk behind the counter looked up from his phone just long enough to nod at me, which was about 1,000 times more acknowledgement than I'd gotten from my in-laws all evening. I grabbed a bottle of water and some napkins, trying to clean the worst of the sauce off my face while I figured out what the hell I was going to do next. That's when I spotted the sign advertising free Wi-Fi, and suddenly I had a plan. Or maybe not a plan exactly, but at least an idea that didn't involve going home to face Marissa's disappointed silence or sleeping on the couch like a dog who'd had an accident on the carpet. I pulled out my phone, ignored the 17 missed calls and 43 text messages, and opened up a travel website. The screen loaded with all those cheerful vacation photos, couples holding hands on beaches, families laughing over dinner, people living their best lives in places where nobody gave a damn about your pedigree or your portfolio. Where do you want to go? The search bar asked, cursor blinking patiently like it had all the time in the world for me to figure out my life. Anywhere, I thought. Anywhere but here. Anywhere but back to that house where I'd spent 6 years shrinking myself down to fit into spaces that were never meant for me in the first place. Somewhere warm, somewhere far away, somewhere nobody knew my name or cared about my marriage or expected me to apologize for existing. My fingers hovered over the keyboard for a moment, and then I typed 4 letters that felt like a prayer, HAWA. The search results populated faster than I expected, like the universe was just waiting for me to finally make a decision. Flights to Honolulu, hotel deals, car rentals, all the infrastructure of escape laid out in neat little rows with prices and times and the promise of 80-degree weather year-round. I clicked on the first airline result and found myself staring at a departure time that made my heart skip. Flight 447 to Honolulu, departing in 5 hours and 12 minutes. Red-eye special. Probably full of honeymooners and people running away from their problems, which made it perfect for my current situation. The price made me wince a little. One-way tickets aren't exactly budget-friendly, especially when you're buying them at the last minute. But then I thought about Uncle Howard's condo that cost more than most people's houses, about Aunt Margot's jewelry collection that could probably fund a small country, about all the money the Prescott family threw around like confetti while treating me like I should be grateful for the privilege of breathing their air. Screw it. I pulled out my credit card, the one Marissa was always telling me to use more responsibly, the one that came with lectures about our budget and our future and our 5-year plan. Tonight, it was going to buy me something I hadn't had in years, a choice that was entirely my own. The booking process was surprisingly simple, like the website understood that people making these kinds of decisions at gas stations at 11 p.m. weren't looking for complicated forms and multiple confirmation screens. Name, card number, confirmation of seat assignment, and suddenly I was holding a digital boarding pass on my phone that said Grayson Mitchell, Honolulu, Hawaii, seat 23A. 23A. A window seat, which felt appropriate somehow. I'd be able to watch the mainland disappear beneath the clouds, watch everything I'd been trying so hard to fit into shrink down to nothing while I flew towards something completely unknown. The confirmation email hit my inbox with a cheerful ding, complete with helpful reminders about check-in times and baggage restrictions. Baggage restrictions. I almost laughed out loud right there in the gas station, surrounded by energy drinks and lottery tickets, and the smell of Roller Grill hot dogs. What baggage was I going to bring? The shirt covered in marinara sauce? The years of accumulated resentment? The wedding ring that suddenly felt like it weighed about 50 pounds? I paid for my water and walked back out to the car, phone buzzing again with another round of calls I had no intention of answering. 5 hours and 12 minutes until takeoff. Enough time to drive to the airport, park in long-term parking like I was going on a normal business trip instead of fleeing my entire life, and maybe grab some actual clothes that didn't look like they'd been used as target practice by an Italian restaurant. Sitting in the driver's seat, I looked at that boarding pass one more time. Grayson Mitchell, it said. Not Grayson Prescott adjacent. Not Marissa's disappointing husband. Not the guy who didn't quite fit in at family dinners. Just Grayson Mitchell, passenger, destination unknown. For the first time in 6 years, that felt like exactly the right name to be. You know that moment in action movies when the hero's phone starts going off like the world's most annoying alarm clock, and you just know that whatever peace and quiet they had is about to go straight to hell? Well, apparently my life had just turned into one of those movies, except instead of international spies or alien invasions, I was dealing with something far more terrifying. The collective wrath of the Prescott family. 5 minutes. 5 freaking minutes after I hit confirm purchase on that airline ticket, and my phone lit up like the 4th of July had a baby with Times Square on New Year's Eve. The thing was vibrating so hard against the dashboard that I was half worried it might achieve actual flight before I did. I'd barely pulled out of the gas station parking lot when the first wave hit. Call after call, text after text, voicemail notifications piling up faster than I could even read the names. It was like watching a social media meltdown in real time, except instead of strangers on the internet, it was my own family-in-law losing their collective minds because I'd had the audacity to leave their little performance without taking a bow. The irony wasn't lost on me that these people, who couldn't be bothered to offer me a napkin when I was sitting there covered in marinara sauce, suddenly had an urgent need to communicate now that I wasn't playing by their rules anymore. Marissa was leading the charge, naturally. Her name kept flashing on the screen like a neon sign advertising disappointment. "Where are you?" popped up in a text bubble, followed immediately by "Don't do this," and then "You're making a scene." Because apparently leaving quietly after being humiliated was somehow more dramatic than dumping hot pasta on someone's head in front of 30 people. The logic of the Prescott family, ladies and gentlemen, always consistent in its complete lack of consistency. But Marissa was just the opening act. The real show started when Tristan got involved. I could practically see him holding an ice pack to his jaw while frantically typing threats into his phone, probably feeling like the victim in all this. His messages started pouring in faster than I could delete them. "You're done," followed by, "I'll have you arrested," and my personal favorite, "You have no idea what you've started." What I'd started. Right. Because apparently throwing the first punch was dumping food on someone, and defending yourself was the real crime here. I was starting to think these people lived in some kind of alternate reality where normal cause and effect relationships had been suspended in favor of whatever narrative made them look good. Then Aunt Margot joined the party, and boy, did she come loaded for bear. Her messages read like they'd been dictated by a disappointed Victorian matriarch who'd just discovered that the servants had been using the good china. "We opened our family to you, and this is how you behave," she wrote, as if they'd been doing me some kind of massive favor by tolerating my existence at their dinner table. "After everything we've done for you, this is the thanks we get?" Everything they'd done for me. Let's see. What exactly had they done for me over the past 6 years? They'd included me in family gatherings where I was either ignored or insulted. They'd made it crystal clear that I wasn't really welcome in their social circle. And they treated me like a charity case who should be grateful for whatever scraps of attention they threw my way. Oh, and tonight they'd used me as target practice for Italian food. Truly, I was the luckiest man alive. Uncle Howard's messages were more restrained, but somehow more threatening, written in that careful corporate language that he probably used to fire people without technically breaking any labor laws. "Call me immediately," he wrote, followed by, "We need to discuss your future with this family." My future with this family. Like I was an employee whose contract was up for review instead of someone who'd married into their dysfunction. But the real kicker came from Sophie, Marissa's cousin, who apparently thought this was all some kind of entertaining family drama that she could live tweet for her friends. "OMG, everyone is so upset," she wrote, complete with crying laughing emojis. "Aunt Margot is literally shaking. Uncle Howard is pacing around talking about lawyers. This is better than reality TV. Better than reality TV." There it was, the family motto in all its glory. Real people's pain was just entertainment for them, something to spice up their otherwise boring lives of privilege and plenty. I wondered if Sophie was already planning to turn this into content for her Instagram story, maybe with some kind of inspirational quote about family loyalty overlaid on a picture of her avocado toast. The messages kept coming, a steady stream of outrage and demands and threats that painted a pretty clear picture of how the Prescott family handled anyone who dared to color outside their carefully drawn lines. They weren't worried about me as a person. Not one message asked if I was okay, or if I was hurt, or if I needed anything. They were worried about their image, their control, their ability to maintain the carefully constructed narrative where they were the generous benefactors and I was the grateful recipient of their largesse. I pulled over at a rest stop about 20 miles from the airport, partly because my phone was making it hard to concentrate on driving, and partly because I needed to see just how deep this rabbit hole went. The parking lot was nearly empty except for a few long-haul truckers catching some sleep and a family with small kids making an emergency bathroom stop. Sitting there under the fluorescent lights of the rest stop, I started scrolling through the messages more carefully, and that's when I noticed something that shouldn't have surprised me, but somehow still did. Not a single one of them mentioned the fact that Tristan had dumped hot food on my head. Not one message said, "Hey, maybe my brother/nephew/son was out of line." Not one person suggested that pouring marinara sauce on someone might be considered inappropriate dinner behavior. It was all about my reaction, my violence, my overreaction to what they were probably already spinning as a harmless prank between family members. The actual assault, because let's call it what it was, had already been memory holed in favor of a story where I was the unstable one who couldn't take a joke. The counter on my phone showed 315 total notifications, and they were still climbing. 315 separate attempts to drag me back into their web of dysfunct. 315 reminders of why I'd bought that plane ticket in the first place. But here's what struck me as I sat there in that rest stop parking lot, surrounded by the honest exhaustion of people traveling for real reasons. Work, family visits, moving across the country for new jobs. These messages weren't from people who cared about me. They were from people who cared about maintaining their version of reality, where they could treat people however they wanted and never face any consequences. Not one message said, "Are you okay?" Not one person asked if the sauce had burned my skin or if I needed medical attention. Not one member of Marissa's family seemed to think that maybe, just maybe, they should be apologizing to me instead of demanding that I apologize to them. I looked at that growing pile of digital outrage, all those words and threats and demands, and realized something that felt like a weight lifting off my shoulders. I didn't owe these people anything. Not an explanation, not an apology, not even a response. So I did something that felt better than any comeback I could have written, better than any angry phone call I could have made, better than any dramatic confrontation I could have staged. I turned off my phone and put it in my bag, cutting off their access to me as simply as flipping a switch. The silence that followed was more satisfying than any argument I'd ever won. You know how people always say that airplane air is recycled and gross and makes you feel like you're breathing through a dirty sock? Well, let me tell you something. After 6 years of breathing the suffocating atmosphere of Prescott family expectations, that recycled airplane air tasted like pure freedom with a hint of peanuts and possibility. The red-eye flight to Honolulu had been exactly what I'd needed. 5.5 hours of enforced silence with nothing but the hum of engines and the occasional snore from the businessman in 24B. No phone calls, No text messages, no family members trying to drag me back into their twisted version of reality. Just me, a tiny bag of pretzels, and the growing realization that I'd actually done it. I'd bought a one-way ticket to anywhere but here and followed through. But nothing, and I mean nothing, could have prepared me for that first breath of Hawaiian air. The plane doors opened, and it hit me like a warm hug from a grandmother you didn't know you had. Not the aggressive, in-your-face heat that makes you want to run back inside to air conditioning, but this soft, gentle warmth that seemed to wrap around you like the world's most expensive blanket. It was air with personality, air that smelled like flowers you couldn't name and ocean salt, and something that might have been happiness if happiness had a scent. I walked down that jet bridge feeling like I was entering a different universe entirely. The terminal at Honolulu International wasn't trying to impress anyone with marble floors or crystal chandeliers like the airports back home. Instead, it had this laid-back, "Hey, welcome to paradise, try not to stress about anything" vibe that immediately made my shoulders drop about 3 inches. Hawaiian music was playing softly through speakers that didn't sound like they were trying to compete with the noise of stressed-out travelers. And everywhere I looked, people seemed to be moving just a little bit slower, a little bit easier, like they'd all collectively agreed that rushing around was probably not the best way to spend their time on Earth. The baggage claim was where it really hit me that I'd made a completely insane decision. Everyone else was standing around waiting for their carefully packed suitcases full of vacation clothes and sunscreen and all the things normal people bring when they plan a trip to Hawaii. Meanwhile, I was standing there with nothing but my wallet, my passport, and a single backpack that contained exactly one change of underwear and the business card for a divorce lawyer that I'd been carrying around for 2 years but never had the guts to call. That's when I realized I was going to need somewhere to stay, and probably some clothes that didn't smell like marinara sauce and poor life choices. I pulled out my phone, which I'd reluctantly turned back on once the plane landed, and started scrolling through Airbnb listings, trying to find something that said, "Yes, we welcome people who've just blown up their entire lives on a whim." Most of the listings looked like they'd been photographed by people who'd taken a masterclass in making small spaces look like luxury resorts. Lots of carefully staged photos with perfectly placed pineapples and artfully rumpled white linens that probably cost more per night than I made in a week. But then I found one that was different. The photos were clearly taken by someone who'd just pointed their phone at stuff and clicked. No fancy lighting or strategic fruit placement. Just a small beachfront place with weathered wooden furniture and windows that actually looked like they opened to let in real air instead of Instagram-worthy filtered light. The description was written by someone named Kimo, and it simply said, "Clean, quiet, close to beach. Good for people who want to think or people who want to stop thinking. Your choice." Perfect. I booked it for a week, which felt like either the most reasonable decision I'd made in years or the most irresponsible, depending on how you looked at it. The address led me to a taxi driven by a guy who introduced himself as Paolo and immediately started telling me about his cousin's shrimp truck that I absolutely had to try, his nephew's surf lessons that would change my life, and his grandmother's secret spot for watching sunsets that wasn't overrun with tourists taking selfies. The ride to the Airbnb was like a guided tour through everything I'd been missing while I was busy trying to fit into spaces that were never meant for me. We passed beaches where people were actually playing in the water instead of posing next to it, restaurants that looked like they'd been built by people who cared more about the food than the Instagram potential, and neighborhoods where kids were riding bikes and old men were playing chess in parks, and life seemed to be happening at a pace that actually made sense for human beings. You running away from something or running to something? Paolo asked as we pulled up to a small house that looked like it had been painted by someone who believed that blue should actually look like the ocean and green should actually look like plants. "Little bit of both," I said, which was probably the most honest thing I'd said to anyone in months. He nodded like this made perfect sense. Hawaii's good for that. The islands don't judge. They just let you figure out what you need to figure out. The house was exactly what the photos had promised. Nothing fancy, but clean and comfortable, and so close to the beach that I could hear the waves from the front porch. There was a small kitchen with everything you needed to make actual food, a living room with furniture that looked like it had been chosen for comfort rather than style, and a bedroom with windows that opened wide enough to let in the sound of the ocean. But the real revelation came when I met Kimo himself. I'd been expecting someone who'd been polished by years of dealing with tourists, someone who'd learned to smile on command and recommend overpriced restaurants. Instead, I got a guy in his 50s with hands that looked like they'd actually worked for a living and a laugh that sounded like it came from somewhere deep and genuine. "First time in Hawaii?" he asked, and when I nodded, he grinned. "Good. The island's got a way of showing you things you didn't know you needed to see. You here for business or pleasure?" "Honestly," I said, setting down my pathetic backpack in a living room that somehow felt more like home than any place I'd lived in the past 6 years. "I have absolutely no idea what I'm here for." Kimo's laugh filled the space like warm honey. "Even better. That means you're here for the right reasons." He handed me the keys and a handshake that felt like he actually meant it, like I was a person worth welcoming instead of a problem to be managed. "The ocean's right out that door," he said, pointing toward the back of the house. "Don't overthink it. Just go look at it for a while. The water's got a way of putting things in perspective." So that's what I did. I walked out to the beach behind the house, kicked off my shoes that still smelled faintly of family reunion disaster, and stood at the edge of the Pacific Ocean while the sun started its descent toward the horizon. For the first time in 6 years, nobody was telling me where to stand, how to act, or what to say. The waves didn't care about my family connections, my social status, or whether I belonged anywhere in particular. They just kept rolling in, one after another, like they had all the time in the world. Turns out when you're not spending every waking moment trying to decode the complex social dynamics of people who think you're beneath them, you have a surprising amount of time to figure out what you actually enjoy doing. Who knew? My first week in Hawaii developed a rhythm that felt so natural I started wondering if this was what normal people meant when they talked about work-life balance, instead of work-life complete psychological warfare. I'd wake up when my body felt like waking up, not because an alarm was screaming at me to get ready for another day of disappointment, and I'd walk out to the beach to watch the sunrise paint the sky in colors that didn't exist in the Prescott family palette. The mornings were the best part. There's something about being the only person on a beach at 6 a.m. that makes you feel like you've discovered a secret that the rest of the world hasn't figured out yet. The sand was cool under my bare feet. The water was this impossible shade of blue that made you wonder why anyone ever settled for swimming pools, and the air tasted like possibilities that didn't come with strings attached or family approval ratings. I'd walk for miles, picking up shells that nobody expected me to display properly or appreciate appropriately, watching crabs scuttle around like they had important business to attend to, and generally enjoying the novel experience of existing without constantly calculating how my behavior might reflect on the family name. After the beach walks came coffee and breakfast at this little cafe called Sunrise Shack that looked like it had been built by surfers who'd accidentally become excellent at making food. The owner, a woman named Keiko who had to be pushing 70 but moved like she was half that age, made coffee that could wake the dead and acai bowls that tasted like someone had figured out how to turn tropical paradise into breakfast. "You're the mainland guy staying at Kimo's place," she said on my third morning, not really asking. Island communities, I was learning, had their own communication networks that made social media look sluggish. "Guilty as charged," I said, wondering if being the mainland guy was going to come with its own set of expectations and requirements. "Good," she said, sliding a plate of fresh fruit across the counter. "Kimo says you look like you needed to get lost for a while. Hawaii's perfect for that. Getting lost. I like that way of thinking about it better than running away, or having a midlife crisis, or whatever psychological label the Prescott family was probably attaching to my disappearance. Getting lost implied that you might eventually find something, whereas running away suggested you were just a coward who couldn't handle adult responsibilities. The afternoons were for reading. I discovered that when you're not constantly stressed about family dinner performances or social obligations that felt like pop quizzes you hadn't studied for, you could actually concentrate on books for more than 10 minutes at a time. I'd grab something from the little bookstore in town, a place that clearly existed because the owner loved books, not because she'd calculated the optimal profit margins on literary fiction, and find a spot on the beach or at one of the outdoor cafes where nobody cared if you sat there for 3 hours nursing a single iced tea. It was at one of these cafes, a place called The Grind that had mismatched chairs and Wi-Fi that worked about 60% of the time, that I met Lonnie. She was at the table next to mine, hunched over a laptop and muttering things that sounded distinctly uncomplimentary about website design platforms. "You okay over there?" I asked after she'd called her computer something that would have made Aunt Margot clutch her pearls so hard she'd probably need medical attention. "Oh, I'm fantastic," she said, her voice dripping with enough sarcasm to fill a swimming pool. "Just trying to update my shop's website, and this piece of garbage platform is acting like I asked it to solve world hunger instead of add a simple photo gallery." Lonnie, as it turned out, ran a surf shop called Wave Rider that had been in her family for 20 years. She was about my age, with sun-bleached hair and hands that looked like they'd spent a lot of time fixing things, and she had absolutely zero patience for technology that didn't work the way it was supposed to. "What kind of shop?" I asked, closing my book because this conversation was infinitely more interesting than whatever literary masterpiece I'd been pretending to read. "Surf shop. Boards, gear, lessons for tourists who think they're going to become the next Kelly Slater after a 2-hour session." She gestured at her laptop screen like it had personally offended her ancestors. "We do pretty well, but our website looks like it was designed in 1995 by someone who'd never seen the internet before." Here's where things got interesting. Back in my previous life, the one where I spent most of my time trying to disappear into furniture at family gatherings, I'd actually been pretty good at website design. It was something I'd picked up in college and kept doing on the side, mostly for small businesses that couldn't afford the big fancy agencies that charged more for a logo than most people made in a month. "I might be able to help with that," I said, surprised to hear myself volunteering for something without first calculating how it might affect my standing with people I was trying to impress. Lonnie looked up from her laptop, squinting at me like she was trying to figure out if I was serious or just another mainland tourist who thought he could solve all of Hawaii's problems with his superior continental wisdom. "You know anything about websites?" she asked. "A little," I said, which was probably the most understated thing I'd said since arriving in paradise. "Mind if I take a look?" What followed was the most fun I'd had working on anything in years. Lonnie's existing website was indeed a disaster of epic proportions. Broken links, photos that loaded sideways, and a color scheme that looked like it had been chosen by someone who'd never seen an actual ocean. But it wasn't unfixable, just neglected. We spent the next 3 hours completely rebuilding the thing from scratch. Lonnie provided the content and the vision. She knew exactly what her customers needed and how they thought, while I handled the technical stuff that made her want to throw her laptop into the nearest volcano. "You want clean, simple, easy to navigate," I said, pulling up examples of sites that actually worked. "Nothing fancy, just functional. People want to see your boards, check your lesson schedules, maybe read some reviews from happy customers." "Exactly," she said, and I realized it had been months since someone had responded to one of my ideas with genuine enthusiasm instead of polite tolerance or outright dismissal. By the time we finished, Wave Rider had a website that actually looked like it belonged to a business that knew what it was doing. The photos loaded properly, the navigation made sense, and the whole thing had a clean, professional look that still felt relaxed and welcoming. "How much do I owe you?" Lonnie asked as we tested the final version on her phone. "Nothing," I said, surprising myself again. It was fun. Fun. She looked at me like I'd just claimed that root canals were my favorite hobby. "You think website design is fun? When it's not for people who treat you like their personal tech support slave." "Yeah, it's actually pretty enjoyable." That's when she made me an offer that would change everything. I've got a couple of friends who run businesses around here. They're all dealing with the same kind of website disasters. If you're interested in picking up some side work while you're getting lost, I could put in some good words. Side work. Not charity, not family obligations, not doing favors for people who'd never return them. Actual work that I'd chosen to do, for people who appreciated it, at my own pace and on my own terms. Sitting there at that mismatched table, watching the sun start its descent toward the horizon while Lonnie scrolled through her new website with obvious satisfaction, I realized something that should have been obvious but somehow felt revolutionary. This was the first time in years that I'd done work that felt like it belonged to me. Not work that I did to impress my in-laws, not projects designed to boost my standing in some social hierarchy I'd never signed up for, but actual work that solved real problems for real people who treated me like a human being instead of a convenient disappointment. "Yeah," I said, watching a couple of surfers paddle out to catch the evening waves. I think I'd like that. 2 weeks in paradise had done something weird to my relationship with technology. Back in my old life, my phone was basically a digital leash that kept me connected to every disappointment, obligation, and passive-aggressive family text thread that made up my daily existence. Here in Hawaii, the thing had been sitting in a drawer like a piece of radioactive waste that I was pretty sure would kill me if I got too close to it. But eventually, reality has a way of knocking on your door, even when that door happens to be attached to a beachfront bungalow in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. My phone battery had finally died sometime during week 1, and I'd been perfectly content to let it stay that way. Dead phones can't deliver bad news, can't remind you of the life you left behind, and can't buzz with notifications from people who think you owe them explanations for your own happiness. Unfortunately, they also can't be used to run a business, and Lonnie's referrals were starting to pile up faster than I could handle with just her laptop and the questionable Wi-Fi at the grind. 3 local businesses wanted website overhauls, 2 needed complete e-commerce setups, and a local artist wanted an online gallery that didn't look like it had been designed by someone who'd learned HTML from a cereal box. So there I was, standing in the little electronics shop in downtown Honolulu, holding a phone charger and trying to work up the courage to plug my phone back into the world I'd left behind. The shop owner, a guy named Dave who looked like he'd been selling electronics since before smartphones were even a twinkle in Steve Jobs' eye, was watching me stare at the charger like it might explode. "You okay, man?" he asked. "You look like you're about to defuse a bomb instead of charge a phone." "Something like that," I said, handing him a 20 and wondering if there was any way to SE. Back at the bungalow, I plugged the thing in and watched it slowly come back to life with all the enthusiasm of someone waiting for their STD test results. The Apple logo appeared, followed by the home screen, followed by the most ridiculous notification badge I'd ever seen in my life. 347 unread messages. 347. I sat there on Chemo's comfortable old couch, listening to the waves crash outside, and watching that number blink at me like a neon sign advertising everything I'd been successfully avoiding for the past 2 weeks. Part of me wanted to throw the phone right back in the drawer and pretend I'd never seen it. Part of me was curious about just how deep the rabbit hole of family outrage had gotten in my absence. Curiosity won, because apparently I'm a glutton for punishment. The voicemail box was completely full. 37 messages that I was pretty sure would contain enough guilt, manipulation, and threats to power a small city. I started with those, figuring I might as well get the worst of it over with first. Marissa's voice hit me like a cold slap of reality. The first few messages were angry, really angry. "Where the hell are you, Grayson? You can't just disappear like this. We need to talk. Call me back immediately." Her voice had that sharp edge it got when she was trying to control something that wasn't cooperating, like a broken appliance or a husband who'd finally grown a backbone. But as the messages progressed, the anger shifted to something that was almost worse, strategic crying. By message number 12, she was sobbing into the phone about how worried she was, how she just wanted to know I was safe, how we could work through this if I'd just come home and talk to her like a reasonable adult. "I know you're hurt," she said in one message that was clearly performed for an audience. "I know things got out of hand at the reunion, but running away isn't the answer, Grayson. We're married. We made vows. You can't just abandon everything because you had a fight with my brother." A fight with her brother. Right. Because that's what you call it when someone dumps hot food on your head and you defend yourself. A little disagreement between boys. Nothing that couldn't be solved with a firm handshake and maybe a nice bottle of wine. Tristan's messages were exactly what you'd expect from someone whose jaw I'd rearranged with my fist. The first few were pure rage, promising legal action and making threats that probably would have scared me if I'd still been living in his world of consequences and social standings. "You're finished," he snarled in one particularly charming voicemail. "I'm going to destroy you. You'll never work in this town again. Never work in this town again." Like I was some kind of mob movie character instead of a guy who designed websites and had finally gotten tired of being treated like furniture. I almost laughed out loud at that one, sitting there in my beach bungalow with more work than I could handle and zero interest in whatever town he thought he controlled. But the later messages from Tristan were different, more calculated. "Look," he said in what was clearly meant to be his reasonable voice. "Maybe we both got a little heated. Why don't you come back and we'll talk this through like adults? Marissa's worried sick, and the family thinks you might be having some kind of breakdown. Some kind of breakdown. Translation: they decided I was mentally unstable, which was probably easier for them to accept than the possibility that their behavior had finally pushed someone past their breaking point. Uncle Howard's messages were all business, delivered in that smooth corporate tone that said he was used to fixing problems with money and influence. Grayson, this has gone far enough. You're embarrassing the family, and more importantly, you're hurting Marissa. I think we can find a way to make this work for everyone. Call me back, and we'll discuss your options. My options? Like I was an employee being offered a severance package instead of a person who'd finally decided to prioritize my own sanity over their dysfunctional family dynamics. Aunt Margot's messages were pure psychological warfare, listing every opportunity I was throwing away by behaving like an ungrateful child. We had plans for you, she said in one particularly manipulative voicemail. Howard was going to bring you into the business. We were going to help you build something real. But you've shown your true colors now, haven't you? Plans for me. Help me build something real. As if their version of my life was somehow more legitimate than whatever I might choose for myself. As if success could only be measured by how well I fit into their predetermined mold of what a proper Prescott family member should look like. But the real kicker came from Sophie, who'd apparently appointed herself the family's social media correspondent. Her messages were breathless updates on the family drama, delivered like she was reporting from the front lines of a particularly juicy reality show. Everyone's talking about you, she said in one message that was equal parts excited and horrified. Aunt Margot thinks you've joined a cult or something. Uncle Howard keeps muttering about hiring a private investigator. And Marissa? Oh my God, Marissa is acting like you died or something. She's telling everyone you're having a nervous breakdown. A nervous breakdown. There it was again, the family's preferred explanation for my sudden departure. Much easier to accept than the possibility that their golden boy had crossed a line and finally faced consequences for it. I scrolled through the text messages, which were more of the same. Guilt, manipulation, threats, and a stunning lack of self-awareness about what had actually happened that night. Not one message acknowledged that Tristan had assaulted me. Not one person suggested that maybe, just maybe, dumping hot food on someone wasn't appropriate family fun. It was all about my reaction, my over-response, my inability to take a joke and play along with their twisted version of family bonding. But here's what struck me as I sat there in that peaceful bungalow, listening to the sound of waves and feeling the warm Hawaiian breeze through the open windows. Their anger wasn't really about me leaving. It was about me leaving without permission, without explanation, without giving them the chance to control the narrative and manage the situation according to their preferred script. They weren't upset because they'd lost me. They were upset because they'd lost control of me. And that realization felt better than any apology they could have offered, better than any explanation they could have given, better than any attempt to make things right. I deleted every single message without responding to a single one. No explanations, no justifications, no carefully worded emails trying to make them understand my perspective. Just silence. The kind of silence that says more than any argument ever could. You know what's funny about making a decision that everyone back home thinks is completely insane? Eventually, you stop caring whether they think it's insane or not, and you start focusing on whether it's actually working out for you. And let me tell you, 3 weeks into my Hawaiian adventure, things were working out better than I had any right to expect. The website work that had started with helping Lonnie had turned into something that looked suspiciously like an actual business. Word travels fast in island communities, especially when that word is mainland guy who can make your crappy website stop sucking without charging you a fortune. My phone, the same phone that had been buzzing with family drama and threats just a week ago, was now ringing with calls from local business owners who had actual problems they wanted me to solve. There was Maria, who ran a food truck called Island Fusion and needed an online ordering system that didn't crash every time more than 3 people tried to use it simultaneously. There was Tommy, a fishing charter captain whose website looked like it had been designed by someone who'd never seen a boat, let alone been on one. And there was Elena, who made jewelry from beach glass and shells and wanted an e-commerce site that captured the spirit of her work without looking like every other generic craft store on the internet. Real work for real people with real problems. It was a revelation that probably shouldn't have been as surprising as it was, but after years of doing favors for Marissa's family connections, people who treated web design like some kind of mysterious voodoo and expected miracles while complaining about every invoice. Working with folks who actually appreciated what I was doing felt like discovering a new planet. The best part was that nobody here knew about my previous life as the family disappointment. To Maria, I was just the guy who fixed her website so customers could actually place orders without wanting to throw their phones into the ocean. To Tommy, I was the computer wizard who made his charter business look professional enough to compete with the big resort operations. To Elena, I was the person who figured out how to make her art look as beautiful online as it did in real life. None of them cared that I'd never been good enough for the Prescott family standards. None of them expected me to apologize for existing or to constantly prove that I deserved to breathe the same air as my social betters. They just wanted someone who could solve their problems without talking down to them or charging them like they were funding a space mission. The work was good, but the real breakthrough came on Friday evenings at the pier with Chemo. It had started accidentally. I'd been walking along the waterfront around sunset, trying to clear my head after a long day of coding, when I'd spotted him sitting on a bench with a cooler full of beer and a smile that could power the whole island. "Mainland guy," he'd called out, waving me over like we'd been friends for decades instead of casual acquaintances who'd exchanged maybe 50 words total. Perfect timing. I was just about to watch the sun do its thing, and beer always tastes better when you've got someone to share it with. That first Friday had turned into a weekly tradition that I looked forward to more than I'd looked forward to anything in years. Chemo had this way of talking that made everything seem both completely serious and totally relaxed at the same time. He'd worked construction for 30 years, raised 3 kids who were all doing well for themselves, and had opinions about everything from local politics to the best way to grill fish that were both informed and completely unpretentious. "You settling in okay?" he asked during our 3rd beer summit, watching a cruise ship slide past the harbor like a floating city of tourists who'd probably never see the real Hawaii. "Better than okay," I said, surprised to realize how true that was. "This place is starting to feel like home." "Good," he nodded, taking a long pull from his beer. "Hawaii's got a way of calling to people who need it. Not everyone hears it, but when you do, you know." We'd sit there watching the sun paint the sky in colors that didn't exist in any of the fancy art galleries the Prescott family liked to frequent, talking about everything and nothing while fishing boats headed out for the night shift and joggers made their evening rounds along the waterfront. Sometimes we'd talk about work. Chemo was full of stories about construction projects that had gone hilariously wrong and clients who'd made requests that defied both physics and common sense. Sometimes we'd talk about family, his kids, his grandkids, his wife who'd passed away 5 years ago, and who he still missed every single day. But mostly, we'd just exist in the same space without any pressure to perform or impress or justify our presence. It was the kind of friendship that developed naturally, based on mutual enjoyment of each other's company rather than social obligation or family connection, or any of the complicated dynamics that had governed most of my relationships back in my previous life. "You ever miss it?" he asked one evening, gesturing vaguely in the direction of what I assumed was the mainland. "Whatever you left behind to end up here." I thought about that question longer than I probably needed to. Did I miss anything about my old life? The house that had never really felt like mine? The family gatherings where I was tolerated rather than welcomed? The constant feeling that I was failing some test that nobody had bothered to explain to me? "I miss the idea of it," I said finally. "I miss thinking that I had a place where I belonged, even if that place never actually existed." Chemo nodded like this made perfect sense. That's the difference between missing something real and missing something you wished was real. One's worth going back for, the other's just nostalgia for a life you never actually had. The more time I spent in Hawaii, the more I realized he was right. I wasn't homesick for my actual life. I was homesick for the version of my life that had never existed outside my own hopeful imagination. The version where Marissa's family accepted me as an equal, where Tristan treated me like a brother instead of a target, where I fit into their world without having to shrink myself down to accommodate their expectations. But that version had never been real, and pretending it might someday become real had cost me years of actual happiness in favor of hypothetical approval from people who'd never actually intended to give it. The island routine was healing something in me that I hadn't even realized was broken. Morning walks on the beach where nobody expected me to network or make small talk about my career prospects. Afternoons working on projects that people actually appreciated instead of endured. Evenings watching sunsets with a friend who liked me exactly as I was instead of constantly hinting at ways I could improve myself to better fit his social circle. For the first time in years, maybe ever, I was living a life that felt like it belonged to me instead of everyone else. The work I was doing was work I'd chosen, for people I genuinely liked, at a pace that felt sustainable instead of frantic. The friendships I was building were based on mutual respect and shared interests instead of family obligation or social climbing. It wasn't the life I'd planned when I was sitting in that gas station 3 weeks ago, buying a one-way ticket to anywhere that wasn't where I'd been. But it was a life that fit me in ways that my carefully constructed previous existence never had. And for the first time since I could remember, I was excited about tomorrow instead of dreading it. 3 months. 93 days since I'd walked out of that barn-style reunion hall covered in marinara sauce and bruised dignity, and I was sitting in a lawyer's office in downtown Honolulu, signing papers that would officially end the longest mistake of my adult life. The lawyer, a woman named Patricia Kim who had the kind of no-nonsense efficiency that made you understand why she'd built a successful practice, slid the final divorce papers across her desk with a smile that suggested she'd seen this particular brand of liberation many times before. "Congratulations," she said, as I signed my name on the last page. "You're officially a free man." Free man. The words hit me differently than I'd expected. Not with relief, exactly, and definitely not with regret, but with something that felt like possibility wrapped in acceptance. I was free, but more importantly, I was free by choice rather than circumstance. I'd chosen this path, step by step, decision by decision. From that first moment, I decided not to apologize for defending myself to this final signature that severed the last legal tie to a life that had never really fit. The apartment above Lonnie's surf shop had become available 2 weeks ago when the previous tenant, a yoga instructor named Rainbow, who was probably born with a much more conventional name, had decided to follow her chakras to Sedona or some other place where people took spiritual guidance from crystals seriously. Lonnie had offered me the space before it even hit the market, which was either a sign of friendship or a practical business decision based on the fact that I'd already fixed her computer system 3 times and installed a security camera that actually worked. Either way, I'd jumped on it faster than a tourist jumping away from a Portuguese man of war. The place was small. Basically a studio with a kitchen alcove and a bathroom that required some creative maneuvering, but it had windows that opened wide enough to let in the constant sound of waves and a view of the ocean that made every morning feel like a vacation commercial. Moving in had been the easiest relocation of my life, mainly because I owned exactly 3 suitcases worth of stuff and had developed a deep appreciation for the minimalist lifestyle. No family heirlooms to worry about. No furniture that came with emotional baggage. No wedding photos to pack away in boxes labeled, "Deal with this later." Just clothes, a laptop, some books, and a coffee maker that had become my most prized possession after discovering that Island Time included a much more relaxed approach to caffeine availability. The business had grown beyond anything I'd expected when I first helped Lonnie with her website disaster. Word of mouth in island communities travels faster than gossip at a high school reunion, and apparently, mainland guy who actually knows what he's doing and doesn't treat you like an idiot was a rare enough commodity to keep me busier than I'd ever been in my previous life. I had a steady stream of clients ranging from local restaurants to tour operators to artists who made everything from custom surfboards to jewelry that looked like the ocean had personally designed it. But the real revelation was that I was making more money doing work I actually enjoyed than I'd ever made trying to impress people who would never be impressed anyway. Turns out that when you're genuinely good at something and you work with people who appreciate what you do, the financial part tends to sort itself out without requiring family connections or social networking events that felt like endurance tests. The apartment came with a small desk that fit perfectly under the main window, positioned so I could look up from my laptop and watch surfers catching waves while I worked on whatever project was currently demanding my attention. Today it was a complete e-commerce overhaul for a local coffee roaster who'd been trying to sell his beans online using a system that looked like it had been designed by someone who'd heard about the internet but never actually seen it. The ocean breeze carried through the open windows, rustling the curtains I bought at a local market from a woman who'd spent 20 minutes telling me about the traditional Hawaiian patterns while her granddaughter taught me how to pronounce mahalo correctly. It was the kind of interruption that would have driven me crazy in my old life, where every minute was scheduled and every interaction was measured against its potential value to my social standing. Here, it felt like the most natural thing in the world. Buying curtains from someone who cared about the history behind the patterns, learning a word that meant more than just thank you in a language that belonged to this place I was slowly becoming part of. My phone, which had become a tool for actual work instead of a device for delivering family drama, buzzed with a text from Kimo, Sunset Beer Summit in 1 hour. Tommy caught Simono today, and Elena's bringing her famous mac salad. You in? I looked at my laptop screen, where about 3 hours of work remained on the coffee roaster's website, and realized something that would have shocked my former self. The work could wait. Not because I was lazy or irresponsible, but because I'd learned the difference between urgent and important, between other people's expectations and my own priorities. The website would get finished, the client would be happy, and the world would continue spinning without requiring me to sacrifice every moment of personal time on the altar of productivity. Definitely in. I texted back, closing the laptop and walking to the small closet where I kept the kind of clothes that prioritized comfort over appearance. Board shorts, t-shirts that had never seen an iron, and flip-flops that cost less than the socks I used to wear to family dinners. Walking down to the beach where our informal Friday group had started gathering, I passed the mirror that came with the apartment and caught a glimpse of someone I barely recognized. Tan from spending actual time outdoors instead of commuting between air-conditioned buildings. Relaxed in a way that went deeper than just the absence of stress. Happy, which was such a foreign concept that it had taken me weeks to identify the emotion correctly. The beach was already occupied by the usual suspects. Kimo with his cooler of beer and infinite supply of stories about construction mishaps. Tommy cleaning fish with the kind of expertise that comes from 40 years of knowing exactly how sharp your knife needs to be. Elena arranging food on a folding table like she was setting up for a photo shoot. And Lonnie emerging from her shop with a bag of ice and a grin that suggested she'd just closed a deal with some tourists who thought they were going to become professional surfers after one lesson. Mainland guy, Kimo called out, using the nickname that had somehow evolved from identifying description to term of endearment. Perfect timing. Tommy just finished telling us about the time he accidentally caught a monk seal and had to explain to the Coast Guard why he was hugging a federally protected species. This was my life now. Friday evening fish and beer with people who'd become family not through marriage or blood or social obligation, but through the simple process of choosing to show up for each other week after week. No dress code, no hidden agendas, no complex dynamics that required a decoder ring and a sociology degree to navigate. Just people who liked each other, sharing food and stories while the sun painted the sky in colors that never got old, no matter how many times you watched the show. I grabbed a beer from Kimo's cooler and settled into the sand, feeling the warmth that lingered from the day's sunshine and listening to Elena describe her latest jewelry project, while Tommy argued with Lonnie about the best bait for certain types of fish and Kimo planned his next home improvement disaster. Somewhere on the mainland, my former in-laws were probably still discussing my disappearance, still trying to figure out how to spin my departure into a story that made them look like the victims. Marissa had probably moved on, found someone more suitable to the family standards, someone who understood the importance of proper behavior at social gatherings and never confused self-respect with selfishness. And for the first time since I'd known any of them, I genuinely hoped they were happy. Not because I missed them or wanted to reconcile, but because their happiness was no longer connected to mine. They could live their lives according to their values, and I could live mine according to mine, and neither of us had to apologize for the incompatibility. The sun touched the horizon, turning the ocean into a mirror that reflected possibilities I was still discovering. Tomorrow I'd finish the coffee website, start planning a new project for a local artist, maybe take Lonnie up on her offer to teach me how to surf without embarrassing myself in front of the tourists. But tonight, I was exactly where I belonged, with people who liked me exactly as I was, in a place that felt like home in ways I'd never experienced before. The spaghetti incident seemed like something that had happened to someone else in another lifetime. Not because I'd forgotten it, but because it had become the beginning of something better instead of the end of something that had never really worked anyway. Hawaii wasn't just the place I'd escaped to.